Hey Insiders, this week we are going to share some lessons learned and thoughts around establishing school-wide student intervention blocks. We know that as you are engaging in thinking about how best to support students within your school and how we can embed those supports, the idea of intervention blocks becomes valuable, and we'd like to share some insights around that.
Are you a leader who is navigating the nuances of leading collaborative response in your school or district? Are you unsure of what collaborative response is? Are you looking to understand the critical role leadership plays when establishing and refining a collaborative response approach?
Collaborative response began as a grassroots approach to focus on the needs of students through a framework of collaboration. That approach has grown to a movement that is training leadership and education.
Through the Leading Collaborative Response podcast, Kurtis and I share our own experiences of leading collaborative response and lessons learned as we continue to learn and gain insight through the experiences of working alongside others. We also have the opportunity to engage in conversations with school and divisional leaders implementing the framework in their own organizations.
We know great leaders build great teams because that is what every child deserves. Subscribe to the Leading Collaborative Response podcast and join the thousands of schools seeing success for students through intentional and focused collaborative efforts.
Before we jump into the episode, remember to join our mailing list at jlinsiders.com. Every Saturday, we send out an exclusive video only to our mailing list, along with other templates, resources, videos, and more. We also share upcoming events and opportunities you may not hear about anywhere else. Go to jlinsiders.com to become part of the JL Insider community. So, when we think about the idea of student intervention blocks within our own school around this work, it really surfaced from a place where we were tiering our supports and determining that we do have some tier 3 level supports provided by someone other than the classroom teacher that are available and happening in the school, and they're having an impact. But we also were starting to hear frustration of students missing something. So for instance, I'm a classroom teacher and I've got these students working on something, and then Lorna arrives to take out 3 students to do some additional work with them, which is great. I understand why and how that's important. That intervention is critical to ongoing success, but they're missing something. And you came during a phys ed or a music class, that became even more problematic because now the student doesn't want to go out. Or we've seen in older grade levels not wanting to look like I'm getting pulled out of class in front of my peers. So this was really that impetus for, what if there was a time in the timetable where everyone was getting intervention, and I'm air quoting if you're listening to this, the idea of everyone's getting what they need in regards to support and or enrichment.
Yeah, absolutely. And we came to a point where we knew that we needed to explore that block of time that everyone would have, would be able to engage in some work around specific strategies that you might need, but based on our data, which is an important part to consider before you jump into your planning and intervention block. And that is to use your data to be able to identify what are the skills that are required for students to be successful in a particular area, which then defines what your intervention will be about.
Yeah, and let's then, because I think what you're talking about is the intentionality and the purpose being clearly defined through our lived experience, and then what we've seen in many, many other schools, moving towards the development and implementation of intervention blocks from a point of need is much different than we've heard of schools that make these tutorial or flex blocks or intervention blocks. We should make those too. And I've heard one school lament that we were actually creating a solution for a problem that didn't exist within the school point, and then realize that, well, how do we structure this? What do we do? And then, well, you know what? That block that we've created, we're abandoning that over time because we don't see the purpose or the need.
It makes me laugh because it makes me think about a time a number of years ago when the flex block was the big thing to be able to look at in high schools, and lots of high schools engaging in that flex block, but not really defining exactly the purpose or what it was that was going to happen there. And it ended up, many schools called it high school recess.
Yeah. And so again, we don't giggle at that out of a lack of leadership or understanding.
Oh, no.
It's just, how do we ensure that the creation of these student intervention blocks has a clarity and purpose to them? So I want to share a little bit more about our experience where we saw that potential opportunity and said, through timetabling, how could we start to create? And we started with a intervention period once a week. And we've seen many, many schools do this, and almost always the remark is, it's a good start, but intervening once a week is not actually having impact for the student, or what happens when the student isn't here on that particular day. Well, now it's 2 weeks. And so we very quickly moved away from a period to a block that would happen consistently each and every day. Now, how we often say, when I'm working with schools on timetabling, for instance, and creating this, we talk about create the space for it to happen, even if you're not going to use it right away. And in essence, that's what we did too.
Yeah,
the timetable was ready for an intervention block, but we didn't implement it until we knew that as a staff team, we were ready. And we started with one block for our entire school across the entire day. And we learned, and this was one of our first lessons learned, is we didn't do it with everyone right away.
No.
We trialed it with one grade level just to see what it could look like. How would we structure? What would be the problems? And it was through that we learned a few little tweaks through that, but then implemented it across multiple grades at the same time. And we quickly found out one block for the entire school was not an effective way to timetable, because we have X amount of students, we have X amount of staff. Those are kind of set numbers. If it's one block, we only have this many staff members, we have this many students, and we found really quickly the groups were too big. What we were doing during that time wasn't well defined. It didn't allow us to provide even more for some students who may need more than just that one block. Having a single block wasn't effective for us long term.
So understanding that that consideration for timetabling prior to the beginning of your school year, to make sure that you have that as a possibility, but knowing that you might not start out with that right away, like you mentioned, and
that the timetable is ready for it,
right,
even if the implementation is not ready for it yet.
And understanding that the implementation takes a bit of thinking and organizing to ensure that you're ready to engage in an effective intervention block. Now, this took us some time to figure out. It was a few rounds before we really got it all figured out. But there are a few lessons that we learned along the way.
We'll be right back to continue this episode.
When we establish continuums of support for our school focused on established priorities, we are answering the question of what will we do when faced with questions of how to support the needs of our students. But the creation of these continuums are only the first step. Join us for the online workshop, 10 Considerations when Utilizing and Refining Your Continuums of Support, part of our Supporting Collaborative Response series. In this on-demand workshop, I will share 5 ways to effectively utilize your continuum of supports within your school
and 5 ways to further refine your continuums to ensure maximum impact. I'll also be sharing numerous resources, templates, and samples. Access this on-demand workshop and you'll have the ability to view and replay all or any portion of the workshop when it best fits your time. Register today to learn more about refining and utilizing your continuum of supports, an integral part of a school's collaborative response.
And now back to our conversation.
Now, this took us some time to figure out. It was a few rounds before we really got it all figured out. But there are a few lessons that we learned along the way. And as Kurtis already mentioned, that idea of piloting with one is a great way to be able to iron out some of the wrinkles in what it is that you're doing to provide support in that intervention time.
So we will link in the notes area a podcast that I did around timetabling for intervention and collaboration, and we are looking to build some further resources. I consult with a lot of schools on timetable design and trying to put together the puzzle that is a timetable when we're trying to think about embedding collaboration and embedding intervention. So one of the keys that we found out was establishing multiple intervention blocks in the day, potentially depending on our school configuration and size. Of course, it looks very different across many schools, but we found by staggering intervention blocks, it would do a few different things, such as being able to double people up into blocks. So for instance, you may be available for block 1 and block 2, which are 2 different intervention blocks that are happening. Well, now we've just created double the staff because the person's available when, so for instance, if we had a division 1 intervention block at this time and a division 2 intervention block at this time, if those students were together, there's only one Lorna to help support. But if we split them apart, Lorna can be there to support in block 1 and then to support in block 2, where now we're multiplying the number of staff.
Making better use of your staff to be able to support and ensuring that those groups are small.
Yeah, and that was a key for us, is if the groups, and through some of our reading and learning, finding out that the small group loses its efficacy once you're past probably about 8 students, and we definitely found that out. That as soon as your group was larger than 8 for some dedicated intervention time, we heard from teachers, I'd rather just have my own class than these mixed groupings. Now, of course, we have seen schools where during that intervention block, it may be that I will take a larger group of students and use it almost like a study hall type place, where during that time you're going to take the select and work through some intervention. So it looks a lot of different ways. Okay, so when we're thinking about some considerations of how to use that block, again, we've been a little bit nebulous on how that block looks because it differs from school to school, and that would be much longer than a single video topic. But through the creation of student interventions, lessons learned. So lesson learned, pilot.
Absolutely.
Try it out. Another one was endeavor to make the group small, which for us, in order to make them small, it meant staggered blocks within our timetable.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What else? What are some other things?
So another one is really thinking about your cycle of intervention and progress monitoring, and to ensure that you are timing that out so that you have opportunities to shift those groups and to be able to identify whether students are gaining the skill that you had hoped they would gain, and then to be able to move them on to another group. So we want to be able to engage in a cycle of most 3 to 4 weeks.
And we have seen some schools do it successfully with 2 weeks. We've seen some do it successfully with 6. It really kind of depends.
Well, it depends on the skill that you're engaging.
There, you just identified another lesson learned is it can't just be you have this group of students that are all about at the same level, and I have this group, and we'll move them when it seems like we need to move. Having that set time of, no, this in this 3-week cycle, these are the groups that we're going to have. But then the important part is, what's the skill that we're doing? And we found that out early, where before we were grouping students based on level and finding out that students were at similar levels for different reasons. There were different skill gaps that were placed. So intervention should be focusing on what's the skill we're teaching during this particular cycle.
And the way we find that skill is, of course, through our assessments.
Yeah.
So being able to
look
back to your data and evidence to identify what are the skills that students are required to have, and then what are the skills that are missing for certain students, and then we group accordingly. But understanding that progress monitoring piece, once we have grouped, once we have engaged in the intervention, then we want to identify, has that group of students achieved that skill? And if they haven't, what's next? Mm-hmm. If they have, then we want to be able to move them on to something new.
So we've seen schools then that will engage, let's use a 3-week cycle. A 3-week cycle, then take a week to reassess, reconfigure, and then after that week start another 3-week cycle. We've seen others that just go from cycle to cycle to cycle. It really depends what your focus is and the steps that you're taking. But something else that surfaced for us early, which then led to 2 different ahas, was that these students would go to your room for this type of a learning experience. Students would come to mine, and it would be a very different learning experience. And it started with whispers of, I'm not so sure that I want my students to go to Kurtis's classroom, because I'm not so sure that what's happening there is as robust as what it could be if they just stayed with me. And so setting up a similar lesson format was really important. So it didn't matter what skill the students were learning at, and whether this was a smaller group or maybe it was a group that was focusing on enrichment, that the learning experience was similar. So we established a consistent lesson format, so that during this intervention block, whether they went with your group or with my group, the format was similar. The other aha that became a huge learning is, if we have a similar format, and we've said this is a 3-week cycle, and we plan using that format, then we can recycle that intervention focus at another time. And we found as soon as we could start recycling, it didn't mean it lessened the planning, and we could also take, here's a intervention set of lessons for this particular skill for the next 3 weeks. Here you go, person, it's already planned, ready to go. And by person, I mean, this might be a teacher, this might be a support staff member. We sometimes had volunteers that could help with that. If a student teacher ever came into the building during one of our cycles, it's, we're going to steal you during this to become one of the instructors, to get, again, those groups down as small as possible. But you remember, and we've seen schools replicate this as well, of this intervention skill has a box, and here's the box of resources with the consistent lesson format, and that consistency was huge for us. And just to give that little example, we had literacy, reading specific, actually more specific around phonemic awareness and phonics development, but that 30-minute lesson was 10 minutes of direct instruction, 10 minutes of practicing the skill through some form of literature, and then 10 minutes of game-based practice. So it didn't matter which group you were going into, that 10-minute, 10-minute, 10-minute looked very similar for the interventions.
We always had a book for the teacher to be able to connect the learning with that skill as well. So there was a component that went back to literature as well.
Absolutely.
But just understanding that consistency from classroom to classroom was really important. And it led to, as you said, the construction of kits that then it made our intervention block easier, because it was always just using that same format but with a different skill, and all the materials were were there. As Curtis,
I think it helped the fidelity over time too,
Oh,
because
yeah.
if I could take this,
for sure.
this intervention that was already set and then just tweak it slightly, they were getting improved all the time. The intervention lessons that we were developing and utilizing.
We had been, as you mentioned before, we would ensure that we had small groups, which meant that we needed as many adults to be engaging in that work around providing that intervention. But the one thing that we did learn and we felt strongly about is that the students with the highest needs within that intervention were with the teachers. That the teachers were taking small groups that had the highest needs and that they were working with those students.
Yeah, so trying to take the individual with the highest skill set or expertise or understanding or training to go with the students most in need. But it's funny that you say that, because do you remember one of our EAs was exceptionally well skilled at early
intervention,
early learning
and,
processes and phonemic awareness, and actually she would be the go-to for some of our highest needs students, rather than say a beginning teacher who maybe didn't have that same background yet. So that really helped us. And I think the idea of staggering those blocks meant that some of our students could attend multiple interventions during the day. Again, it's giving that, increasing the variable of time being focused to help support this. So I hope that we've been able to give you some thoughts and ideas. If you're at a place of looking at some school-wide intervention blocks or different ways to structure the ability for your students to get what they need in potentially some cross-graded skill groups and interventions.
A privilege that we have in being in schools is that we get to see a lot of things happening. And so we've had the opportunity of being able to try this on our own and make it work on our own in our own school. But we also have seen a number of schools who have had really effective intervention and flex blocks at high school too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So please
Same
make sure
principles
that you reach
apply.
out. If we've talked in generalities today, but if you need a little bit more help with the specifics of what's happening within your school, please make sure you reach out.
And as always, if you have examples, stories to share, we'd love to hear about those. So as Lorna mentioned, we'd love for you to make contact. So until the next time that we're able to join you for another conversation, we wish you all the best.
See you soon.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. We'll see you on the next episode.